and welcome everybody from wherever you are around the world. My name's Chris Galvin. I'm the Head of Communications and Outreach at ICoCA. And yeah, it would be great if you'd like to let us know where you are based around the world. I am not going to introduce our panelists initially. I'm going to do that as we kind of enter into the discussion, but I want to kind of welcome you all to this very important topic on human rights and human resources, the challenges and opportunities training private security personnel in complex and fragile environments. You can ask any questions throughout the discussion. I would ask you to do so using the Q&A module, please, rather than the chat. That will help us manage as those questions come in. You can ask questions in French or Spanish as well, and we will we'll translate those. So the background to today's webinar is that ICoCA just about a month ago released our first online training course, and this was a course focused on the prevention of sexual exploitation and abuse. It has really come out of a guidance document that we produced a couple of years ago, which goes into detail for companies giving guidance on how to prevent sexual exploitation and abuse. But coming out of those that documentation and feedback, there has been discussion about how to really embed this within a company, how to provide training, not just on these issues, but on human rights issues more broadly. And there are, challenges and also opportunities in how to do that, which we want to kind of draw out in the discussion today. We had been planning on doing an in-person training, our first in-person training on this issue in Haiti, actually just before the lockdowns over a year ago. And of course, our plans changed. And so we pivoted to the idea of starting to do online training that member companies could access from wherever in the world. But I first want to introduce my colleague Gina Manghini, who has really led the development of this training course on preventing sexual exploitation and abuse at ICoCA. And I want Gina's a projects officer with us. And Gina, it would be really great if you could tell us about the process that you went through for developing this training. We've held a couple of workshops since it was released a month ago. And so we've got some kind of feedback that was launched. And if you could kind of provide some ideas and some insights on the feedback that we've been getting, that would be fantastic.
Thank you very much, Chris, and a pleasure to be here. Hi to everybody. Before maybe looking a little bit more at the PSA online training, the first online training ICoCA has released, allow me just to take a step back and start maybe with a question to the audience. How would you explain human rights to somebody who has never heard about human rights or is familiar with human rights? Maybe some would say, well, everybody has human rights. Human rights are universal. They're the same for everybody. They cannot be lost. They cannot be sold. Or others would maybe explain that's international law and is based on conventions such as the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. While this is all true, the friend who is not really familiar with human rights might get back and say, okay, that's all interesting, but what does that mean for me? What does that mean for my everyday life? What is expected from me? And these questions are exactly the questions private security companies, member companies of ICoCA, are often facing when they're trying to provide training on human rights and explain and unpack these concepts and explain to private security guards what is expected from them. These are also the questions we are often receiving from private security companies at ICoCA when implementing the international code of conduct when trying to explain the standards included in the International Code of Conduct. Maybe for those who are not entirely familiar with the International Code of Conduct, this is a document which is based on human rights principles and international humanitarian law, such as the rules for the use of force, apprehension, the prohibition of torture, or the prevention of sexual exploitation and abuse. So in the past months and years, ICoCA has been working with its member companies and affiliates to unpack a bit more of what is included in the International Code of Conduct, to unpack what human rights are through guidance and through tailored feedback. And most recently, as Chris has mentioned, we were also able to release our first online training unpacking the prevention of sexual exploitation and abuse, which is included in the code, thanks to funding of the UK government. We had 3 months' time to develop this online training. We started in January. And when we started, we asked ourselves all sorts of questions from, well, how can we actually develop training for that range of member companies and affiliates of different sizes, small, big, some at the higher level of progress than others, certified, non-certified, operating in different environments, complex environments, different cultures. And we were also asking ourselves, like, who is then actually the audience? Private security guards themselves, or maybe rather supervisors or managers? So while asking all these questions, we realized that it would be very helpful to work together with a couple of member companies who could accompany this process. So we reached out to 6 member companies representing different sizes, operating in different contexts and cultures, and invited them to provide feedback throughout the project. So we developed module by module together with them, had regular feedback calls after each module we developed, and in the end ended up with 4 modules, kind of putting together this course on prevention of sexual exploitation and abuse. These 4 modules introduce the concept of the prevention of sexual exploitation and abuse. It also reiterates the standards, international standards on the prevention of sexual exploitation and abuse, the obligations of private security personnel, the consequences if they're involved in such misconduct, and also the consequences for victims themselves. And in the 4th module, we cover the responsibilities of managers from communication to HR to the CEO. So as Chris also mentioned, we have rolled out this training at the beginning of April, and to launch it, we also held 2 workshops for member companies and affiliates to explain a bit more how we went about developing this training and introduce the main concepts, and also to get some first feedback on the online course. And here's what we got so far from in terms of feedback. Just to say that this is preliminary feedback, and we very much hope that we hear more from member companies. It was around 4 different areas. The first one was very positive. There is a clear demand from member companies and affiliates to receive more training and support on the prevention of sexual exploitation and abuse, to help unpack that, to give scenarios, make it interactive. And often the feedback we've received was that it was not covered by training programs of the companies themselves, or it was included in the human rights training they had. The second area of feedback we received was very practical, and it was around language and internet access. So the course we have published is at the moment available in English, but companies are operating all over the world in many different languages. So ideally, we'll be able to make it available in other languages such as French or Arabic. And we are aware that this is one of the challenges for particularly guards to access this training. And another piece is, for example, also those who have only bad internet connection or not access to computers. For them, it's also challenging to access this online course. And for those companies who provide maritime services, for example, where often staff are waiting on platforms out at sea without much internet, they won't have the possibility to access this online training. So during these feedback sessions, we were also discussing how could we actually make this training more accessible. For example, if it's not available, if online is not possible, could we, for example, provide offline material or something supporting companies when they are trying to provide training on offline. The third area of feedback we've received was about the length of the training. As I mentioned, it includes 4 modules, and those who took it already reported to us that it takes them around 4 hours. And while we were discussing this feedback, many mentioned that in a training curriculum for private security guards, a lot of different subjects have to be included. So a training of 4 hours is quite long, looking at all the different issues which have to be covered. On the other hand, to really provide a proper training, it is sometimes necessary to cover all the main aspects and subjects. So when discussing also the length and the challenge of this of the length of the training, we thought about, on the one hand, they can do it over a week, for example. They don't need to do it all at once in 4 hours. So through that can spread it out. Or they can also pick and choose which material they want to use and potentially also integrate it into their online classroom training. And the last area of feedback we've received is, I believe, a crucial one. It is around the culture of a society, which makes it often very difficult to share certain concepts and train people on particularly such a sensitive concept as prevention of sexual exploitation and abuse. And I give you an example which emerged during the discussions with the member companies which supported us during the development of this course. And that's related to the standard of not engaging in sexual activity with a child. Now, a child is considered as a person under 18 years old. In many contexts, it is normal that persons who are 16 years old marry already and engage in sexual conduct. So that's where we discussed with member companies, how can they explain to their staff for whom it is normal to be married when they're 16 or to have be involved in sexual activity under 18, how to explain that standard to them. So that was a very interesting but also challenging discussion around the feedback we've received. And I'm sure the discussions are not closed, and we are looking forward to more feedback as we are engaging with companies. So thank you very much, and handing over back to you, Chris.
Thanks so much, Gina, and that's a fantastic insight into some of the challenges there. Now, I'd like to bring in Jean-Pierre Saint-Julius, who is chargé de projet at Professional Security Services in Haiti, PSS. PSS is an ICoCA certified member company. And Jean-Pierre, you were involved in this process, the development of this training course. And so it'd be great to kind of hear from you. First of all, tell us a bit about the company and tell us about how you do go about training. And from your perspective, what are the challenges and potential opportunities when we're tackling topics like preventing sexual exploitation and abuse, but more broadly, human rights?
Thank you, Chris. It's a pleasure for me to be a speaker at this webinar. Hi, everyone. So I'm happy to speak about the challenges and opportunities for the training of private personal security. First of all, let me introduce myself and the company I'm working for. I am Jean-Pierre Julius, and I'm working as a project management officer at Professional Security Services in Haiti, PSS. PSS is a Asian-owned private security services company established in 1995. PSS is a trusted leader with a proven track record in many markets. We have some clients about like a bank and finance institution, embassies, manufacturing and industrial institution, NGO, international organization, residencies, and so on. At PSS, we provide a lot of services like armored security guard, close protection, cash and transit, electronic security, physical security surveys, and specialist training. At PSS, we consider that society is always evolving in the complex security situation of the environment in which we operate. Therefore, we place great emphasis on the training and continuous retraining of our employees. That's why we are involved in the training of our staff to ensure that we create a healthy environment, facilitating respect for human rights and the development of everyone. Therefore, we had the pleasure to collaborate in the development of the ICoCA training module on human rights, which provide knowledge to further train our staff. That's why PSS continuously train qualified personnel to ensure the delivery of best-in-class customer security solution to individual and corporation in Haiti. That is why we provide individual and group training. We provide training in first aid, weapon marksmanship and maintenance, self-defense, power control, defensive driving, and also some training on company policy like human rights, discrimination, harassment, use of force, complaint, and so on. We are in 120 training program, which cover theoretical and practical topics. However, by training personnel, we face a lot of challenges. So, for example, we got a challenge about low level of education. Many of our recruits have a low level of education. Formerly, you use documents typically in French, but now we use the document in French and Creole so that everyone can understand everything. This is why the training of ICoCA is also a challenge for us because it's a few members of our personnel that can understand English. So we need to translate the training in Creole or in French so to allow that all of the people can understand the concept and so on. After we got also misunderstanding of concept. When we teach, we create some important concept like to the use of force, harassment, a sexual exploitation and abuse, discrimination. Most of them they come across this term for the first time in their life, and it was very difficult for them to understand them and well and memorize them. Therefore, we focus more on much more practical training. That's why it's really important to adapt our training with some describing scenarios and asking them to interpret and send out to react while respecting the standards. That's why we will appreciate the module of ICoCA because they have to have some different describing scenarios to understand the concept. After we have also to make some continuous training. That's why to ensure that everyone always has the same level of performance and understanding, it's necessary on the end that we carry out refresher session on the concept learned before, and on the other hand to provide them with continuous training to adapt to change in the community. So after we have bigger class to face, so we equipped our classroom with video projector, PC, and monitors that allow us to face challenge as the internet access to PC for our staff. But we equipped our classroom with a large projector, PC, and video recorder that allow to deliver our classes. The training of security personnel is very important for the development of our company in the respect of human rights. So to provide quality services, it's imperative that our staff to be qualified, and the only way to have one is through training. And depending on the environment in which we operate, we will face different challenges. Therefore, at PSS, we are committed to ensure that the training of our recruit and the continuous education of seasonal security personnel is delivered by some important key members of our management team. Thank you.
Thanks so much for that. Yeah, I'm not on mute. Thank you so much for that. And key issues obviously coming out of there related to access, language. It's not sufficient just to translate things into official UN languages. We have to deal with many, many, many different languages. I'd be interested just to hear. I mean, are you hearing demand from your clients that they expect your staff to be trained on these particular human rights issues, or is this coming more internally from management?
It's come entirely from our management. It's also come from we got some important client that ask us to provide a syllabus to know what training that we provide to our personnel.
Okay, great. So I think we'll kind of unpack some of this as we go on. But I want to now turn to Kevin Palacios. Kevin is based in Ecuador, and he's the director for Latin America at the International Foundation for Protection Officers, IFPO. IFPO have recently joined ICoCA as an observer organization. And Kevin, it would be great to get your sense of first tell us about what IFPO does, because training is part of your core business. How does that roll out in Ecuador and Latin America more generally? And what challenges do you see in training guards and security officers in complex environments? And many Latin American countries would tick that box of complex environments, particularly focused on human rights.
Sure. Thank you, Chris. And well, good morning, everyone. Afternoon, where you are. The International Foundation for Protection Officers is a non-profit organization headquartered in Naples, Florida, United States. Our organization was established in 1988 to help address the needs of security protection officers and their supervisors internationally. IFPO is dedicated to advocate for security officers. We constantly run academic research about their roles in the security industry. We gather best practices, international best practices in our books and training guides, and provide a meaningful, cost-effective education for all levels of security personnel. IFPO membership is available for both individuals, employers, and even educational institutions. We believe that education is an essential part of professional development for those charged with protecting others. The foundation serves individuals, security service firms, and organizations that have their own security staff, security departments. Career-oriented officers, as well as individuals, benefit from the recognition and professional standing that the foundation certification conveys. Our security training programs are designed to work on their own or as part of an existing curriculum. Frequently, we even have institutions of higher learning that will include our programs in their courses of study, universities and technical colleges. The IFPO training and certification model was developed after a thorough job competency analysis, and it is aligned with the security industry needs. It consists of a pyramid with 3 levels of training and certification schemes. At the base of the pyramid, we find operational personnel that run on-the-ground patrol and fixed position tasks. They get to be trained and certified as private security officers, or PSO, as we call them. In the middle of the pyramid, we find tactical personnel, which are supervisors, team leaders. We guide them to become certified protection officers, or CPO. And at the top, there is the strategic level with managers certified in security supervision and management, CSSM, and instructors, certified protection officer instructors, or CPOI. So it is key to have all levels of the pyramid to speak the same language and to be aligned with the same doctrine. Answering to your last question, Chris, we face many challenges in training security officers in complex environments. And more specifically, there are three challenges that are encountered with training on human rights. Culture is the first challenge. We often receive security personnel which lack respect to life, even their own, and are willing to take unnecessary risks. So it will be best to receive them at level 0 regarding life risk and security culture. But we receive them sometimes at -10. So this is a problem of the base educational system and the society they live in. But during training, we are obligated to modify beliefs that are deeply embedded in their culture. So through our course curriculum, we also get to model pride in their work and professionalism. The second challenge is the nature of the business. So working in remote areas with complicated work schedules and sometimes with restricted access to internet and communications. So our distance learning model and hard copy books and manuals, which are published in English and Spanish, have proven to be great solutions. But in distance learning, we require the constant involvement of supervisors and management to keep pace of operational learning. So here is why our management and train the trainer programs are so successful and necessary. The third challenge is the local perception of the security business. So many governments, some clients, and even security service providers see security personnel as a commodity. They see them as profit-making instruments that perform activities. They don't see them as professionals. Therefore, training is not deemed as important. They see it as a costly requisite to tick on a checklist or to evade. By the way, we sometimes operate in countries that conform with ridiculous low or even no training standards at all, or in societies where corruption is the norm and people expect to buy certificates. So IFPO believes that the term guard is pejorative, and we work hard to bring them up and into a class change to develop them into professional security officers. And we do so by running cost-effective, internationally standardized programs and focusing to begin with in quality conscious clients. Thank you.
Thank you. You know, you raised some really important issues there. Logistics being not the least of these, especially when we're talking about a workforce that is so dispersed in not just complex environments, but very, very difficult to reach environments. And so how does one reach those guards and officers and bring them up to standard? But culture, obviously, a major issue as well. And I think, in terms of the issue of perception, I'd like to unpack a little bit more, the client piece here, and the kind of cost imperative of how much training costs and what is the demand from clients. But we'll get back to these issues. I want to turn on to Michael Center, who I will introduce next. Michael is chair of ACIS International Extremism and Political Instability Community and security advisor with the United Nations Department for Safety and Security, UNDSS. So Michael, give us a sense of, Kevin's given us a good overview there of the IFPO kind of model, which is really looking at that bottom of the pyramid is really key here, and reaching that bottom of the pyramid and bringing it up within the organization. But tell us a little bit about the kind of work at ACIS and their training approach, perhaps more at the kind of management level. And then, considering management, what are the issues that companies are having to deal with when they are, employing their workforce and sending them out in these complex environments, whether that be conflict, post-conflict states, and as Kevin mentions, often highly corrupt?
Thank you. I think a couple of ways to look at some of the challenges that companies have in these environments is to look at it from the lenses of the customer themselves. In that a lot of, I think, clients of the service providers, they fail to articulate adequately what are the terms of reference. What exactly do you expect of this contractor? If you simply say, we want a company to provide security for us, which unfortunately happens entirely too often, that's a very vague statement, and that translates down to that security officer who's standing on that front entry point. I think one of the other challenges for service providers is that the customers want to outsource, oftentimes for two reasons. One, to save cost, and two, to shield themselves from liability. But what they fail to accept is that that very person who was hired by the service provider to stand on that gate is in fact the first person that your visitors encounter. So whether they're contracted or direct hire, they are in fact the face of the organization who has asked them to be there. And that, I think, links directly to the training. Many companies clearly provide training. There are different standards in different countries of what that minimum standard of training is to achieve the status of being a security officer in that country. That does not mean they're trained to do things at the level of your contract desire. And I think oftentimes it's one of the first places where customers attempt to save money. And it falls into that category of you can save now and pay later, or you can pay now and save later. If you don't put enough adequate training into that person representing you on your front gate, it will cost you in the future. Even issues as simple as what happens if Diana, for example, walks up to that gate as a visitor and is unhappy with the way that Diana has been treated, and that security officer responds in a way that upsets Diana further. Have you trained that person to the level of customer service that you expect for your facility? Or have you even put too much responsibility on that person? Do you really want this person who's not truly connected to your organization dealing with conflict of that person? Now, that hasn't even touched onto the human rights side of things. But I think that weakness in terms of reference really touches the core of what type of training you need. The provider can provide certain training, and I think a lot of customers need to be a bit more prepared that additional in-house training would be required. And I think the final part there related to that would be, it really needs to be a partnership between you and the service provider. It's a give and take between both parties, and which group is best suited to handle which portion. But I think one other thing when it comes to training and expectations from a customer perspective, and I used to run a contract service company myself. I think both parties in that partnership need to have, as we may say where I come from, skin in the game. So I think as you clearly articulate what are those terms of reference that you expect within the contract and the compliance, failure to comply should come with some form of pain. We tend to call these non-compliance penalty clauses within the contract. So you want to ensure that they're trained at a certain level and that they operate at a certain level. And the failure for them to operate at a certain level is not the person on the post. It's the company. It's your actual partner you're dealing with. So I think those would be challenges that go in both directions, that if I were providing the service, I really need to know what you expect as a customer. That vagueness makes that more difficult. Back to you.
Thanks, Michael. I just have one kind of follow-up question, because, this is a commercial marketplace, right? And companies are bidding against each other. Tenders go out and clients look at the bids that come in and they make their decisions. And the sense that we get is that there is kind of a race to the bottom where those decisions are essentially being based on cost alone. And so how does one really get across to clients that cannot be the only factor that they take into account when making these decisions, and how can one focus on this issue of training as being, that it should be a key component within that decision-making process?
That is a really difficult and possibly unanswerable question. I hate to say. I think one of the places that this starts is for me, it's no different than the software business. You have to actually start with the system design specification. What is it that you need? And I do believe that too many consultants are too quick to give potential customers the simple answer. There may also be a case. It is a race to the bottom, and as has already been said, too many of these people standing on the post are viewed as a commodity by both customers and service providers. The challenge becomes, I think, for the companies who want to stand up and do things better, and there are many of them out there. If we, the customers, are going to continue to undercut them, it's not possible for them. There are no customers. So it's difficult. And I think somehow we have to do a better job of not just trying to educate service providers, but I think we need to change the focus more on reaching out to companies that do the contracting and help educate them better on what does this mean for you? And what are the ramifications? You may think you've shielded yourself from liability, but you're not as shielded as much as you think you are. And even if you are, the day that unfortunate officer gets into trouble and uses excessive force that was unnecessary, the publicity still lands on your lap. You can say all day long they're a contractor, but it's your logo that's going to be in the news.
And we know that is a fact. That does happen and is happening more frequently. So I want to turn now to Diana Concannon. Diana is Dean of the California School of Forensic Studies. She's Director of the California Psychology Internship Consortium at Alliance International University and President of the National Council of Schools and Programs on Professional Psychology. So, Diana, from a psychologist's perspective, and someone who is engaging, with other actors on these issues, how should training be approached so that it's effective across the organization? And what role does leadership play, not just within those companies, but across the supply chain, the clients as well, who are contracting the providers? And ultimately, from a leadership point of view, where does the responsibility ultimately lie, to ensure that companies are really, training their workforce so that they can deal with these issues in very complex settings?
Yes, thank you, Chris, and thank you for having me on this wonderful panel. This has been a very rich discussion. I've appreciated the points made thus far and want to echo a few of them in answering your question. I think that leadership is fundamental, obviously. We're talking, I think, about training to, obviously, human rights, human values, human dignity. So it's creating a culture where that respect for others and how we engage with others is reinforced. And that, of course, comes from leadership. We talk about the investment of money. In my experience, the biggest investment is of time. And I don't mean, to Gina's point of having to block out time for an extended training, but rather time in the sense of continuity, continually reinforcing some of the values and some of the behaviors that we are seeking, in our security professionals. And this is a profession. And as professionals, and as your organization represents, we need to enforce the values and the approaches that we cherish, that we value, that we want to sustain. And that is our job as leaders, to continue to model that. In addition to the training piece, and I just want to share a little bit, I'm working with a team, and we're working with both private security and public security in the US law enforcement. And to points that have been made thus far, there's constant need to do multiple and flexible training. So for law enforcement, for example, we're doing some top of shift 10-minute training, all scenario based, on things like de-escalating people who are in crisis, or de-biased thinking, or cultural humility, and working with community members who have vastly different perspectives on what law enforcement represents in this case, or what private security represents. So we're working, what happens though, when we do these top of shifts, is that then the individuals who have participated organically start talking about these concepts. And they bring that education forward in their discussions and how they might apply it, which I think is really critically important, that leadership continually reinforce that. And one final thing I'd want to add around this is that I think we also have to look at how we're assessing those that we are expecting to behave in a certain way. A lot of times the evaluations of our force is quantitative. How many use of force incidents, for example, as opposed to behaviorally anchored in some of the values we want to see, how they're effective in working with diverse others or other things of that nature. And I think there are ways we can constantly provide feedback to help get some of the behaviors and some of the values that we want to see out of those with whom we work.
So, we're focusing on values. I mean, touching on what Jean-Kirsten and Kevin have mentioned, what does one do if the value set, the culture where you're working is just not the same as the values that are outlined in that code of conduct and the international standard? How does one bridge that gap?
That's a great question. In my experience, I think it is about being very clear about the behaviors that we want to see. I think sometimes it's easy to overestimate how people will react to situations. But if we give clear behavior and create an environment where, for example, we say, if you're not sure how to behave and the situation allows it, consult. Then we expect a proportional response. So we consult, we prevent, we mitigate, and only if necessary do we engage. and be really clear about the expectations for those behaviors. So I think scenario-based training is so critically important because it provides examples of what it is that needs to be done or how we expect individuals to respond in certain situations. I think oftentimes we overestimate perhaps people's ability to apply the learning that we provide when we don't provide scenario-based training.
So there are the course on preventing sexual exploitation and abuse does incorporate some scenarios, some case studies, and you know, the feedback that we've had actually, it really echoes what you're saying from the member companies, that it's really valuable. But I'd be interested, John Curson and Kevin, in your thoughts on this, because you know, we've developed this online platform, which is great, you know, if you've got internet connectivity and you can go through those scenarios online. But how do you replicate that in a field where somebody doesn't have connectivity, they can't get online, they're dispersed? How do you get beyond those challenges in providing that kind of training and really scale it up so it's across what might be a very large organization?
Well, in our case, what we focus in is on creating a cascade training. So we first train, of course, the manager, then the instructor. So managers, supervisors should have some training capabilities, or train the trainer as well, training. And when you have this system and you have like the whole pyramid aligned, then it's easier to do the initial training. And regarding scenarios, which I truly believe is very important during this initial training, but also to be able to model, to feedback, and to correct, people on the day-to-day basis. So supervisors are key, because they should be able, again, to provide proper feedback on what the specific actions should be taken, and to do preventative actions as well.
Thank you. At PSS, we are focused on to provide a basic training to our staff. And after, we are focused of retraining a guard, because we have to develop the capacity to accommodate with the complexity of the environment where they operate. That's why at PSS we are focused on training the general management, and after we are focused to training the supervisors, because they are in contact with the guard every day. So if you got the whole team of our supervisors educate training about the PSCA human rights, then they can provide the same training on post with some special train to our guards on post.
Thanks for that. And by the way, if you have questions, please do. Now is your chance to submit questions using the Q&A. So go ahead and do that. I did have one kind of follow-up question to something that we covered in brief earlier, John Curson. Is this, it's time, right? It's time out of a supervisor's day. It's time out of a guard's day, and time is money, as they say. Now, I should mention that the training course that we've provided is free to our members and affiliates, but nevertheless, there is that cost associated with taking people out of the workday. And so, what are the tensions there from the company perspective, and do those tensions, can they be allayed by writing this into a contract so that those costs are covered? Is that realistic with clients?
I don't really understand the question.
Well, so training takes time out of your employees' day, and that's time when they could be on site guarding a premises, and so there are cost implications there for a company, right, to train up their staff. So my question is, can those costs be transferred to the client? Is it realistic from a kind of commercial company perspective to expect a client, when they sign a contract with you, to provide, you know, some training within that contract?
Yes, we got some client that that ask us to have a regular training process each 3 months or 6 months. So we got some important point in our contract to have some particular guards that have a whole program that's different from the others that can only have a basic training program. So it's depend on the contract, it's depend on the environment in which you have the cost for the grants.
And it's interesting, we've got some comments coming in. I mean, Liam Kelly, who I know is with G4S, you know, from his position, he says clients will not pay for this. It will have to be managed by the PSC and driven by leadership. So there's obviously a range of kind of opinions about this. Gina, I'd just like to kind of bring you back in, you know, having heard what you've heard and having gone through this process so far with the PSCA course. What are the main takeaways for you, especially thinking about ICoCA and how, you know, ICoCA can be working with member and affiliate companies to help them raise their standards? And I'd actually, you know, after Gina's spoken, I'd be interested in others' perspective on that as well, what our role should be.
I think there are several points at different levels. And I think one important point, which I definitely took away also from the process of developing this, and it has particularly also been emphasized by Diana, is how important, and Kevin, is how important it is to have scenarios and examples. And we realized that when we started developing and thinking about the different modules, when it was first a very abstract discussion of what should be done, what not, and then we put out a scenario, and suddenly the discussion went into a totally different direction, and people started realizing, oh yeah, but what do we do actually then in this situation? Or that's a good point. We haven't really thought about that. Or normally we do it like that. Is that actually the right way of doing that? So I think scenarios are really crucial, and I think that's also something we are going to take with us in when we move forward to develop further training modules and other aspects of the code, and when we unpack the different elements we have in the code. And that's maybe just focused on the training. And I think we have also talked about the practical aspect, but that's also often related to the capacity you have and the funding you have, unfortunately. And I mean with that, for example, translation into different languages, making it more accessible, providing more material to support companies. Maybe on a higher level, I think what is very important is I think that it's not only dependent on one actor. I think it's the cooperation of different actors. And I think we realize that in particularly at ICoCA, which is a multi-stakeholder initiative with different members represented from civil society organizations to governments, to also observers. And what we haven't touched upon is, for example, the regulatory piece as well, and the role of states. What we have observed in many countries is that there are not really any standards made by the regulatory authorities of how they should train private security companies or private security guards, what are even the minimum standards of training. And I think from that angle could be also another push coming to support companies in training and to make maybe clients also more aware of how important training is, even through the legal kind of perspective. And the other piece, which has been mentioned also particularly by Michael, the clients, that there needs to be also a certain awareness raising, and we're trying to do that at ICoCA, to talk to a variety of clients and raise their awareness that if they're not investing in private security companies supporting the training, that might actually get back to them and cost in the end much more than what they're expecting, particularly if the only criterion to select companies is the price. So just wanting to kind of emphasize this point of only through cooperation of different actors, from the government, the regulatory perspective, to the clients, to the private security company itself as well, realizing that it's actually a benefit for the company and the quality of the services to provide if they invest in training and allocate the necessary time, that only through that package, it is probably possible to kind of improve and strengthen the training aspect. So these are the points and the takeaways I wanted to mention. Thanks.
No, they are great thoughts, and I'd like to open that kind of point up actually about the role of regulation, the regulatory authority. What do others think about that? And I'd be interested if IFPO or ACIS, in their work, engage with governments on this stuff.
Well, we do have a certain good relations with some governments which are open to address the importance of security officers. However, in some other contexts, we find other governments which are not willing to let go. Don't feel comfortable about changing regulations, about seeing security more than just a commodity. What I see is that this type of events and this type of synergies are very important, because we should all be able to make a shift from seeing security as a service only into a critical process, strategic partnerships. So when you have a client seeing security, again, not just as a vendor or a supplier, but more of a strategic partner, then there will be a lot more interest on knowing exactly how budgets are invested into creating more development with the personnel. I see the role of ICoCA as a very important part of this, perhaps detailing what the requirements, the training requirements should be for members, should be also something important. We align to that a lot. Well, we have a code of ethics, but for the security personnel, so as far as we manage to align and to have a similar speech, we should be able again to move and make a transition in this industry. Whilst if we all kind of try to fight a separate battle, all of those efforts kind of melt down.
Yeah, absolutely. And I will say it has been a partnership to bring this one course online, and a partnership with the member companies that we have. But it's very important that we're having this conversation and bringing IFPO and ACIS to the table, because you have great expertise on these issues as well. We are at time, and so I just want to thank all our panelists for the discussion today. This is the first training course that we have put together. There's obviously a lot of learning that we've done, and lots more learning to do. And that learning is a collaborative approach. And so, we welcome everybody to the table so that we can hopefully get this right and scale up and have impact and help, member and affiliate companies really raise the standards across their workforce. But today, I just want to say thank you to everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.